Monarchical Absolutism. Introduction. In this study session, you will be exposed to one of the most important ideas in political thought, monarchical absolutism. We will discuss the nature of monarchy as a political institution, and also review the theory of monarchical absolutism as expounded by Thomas Hobbes. When you have studied this session, you should be able to define and use correctly the keywords printed in bold letters. You should be able to trace the historical development of monarchy as a political institution. You should also be able to discuss the ideas of the theory of monarchical absolutism by Thomas Hobbes. The development of monarchy as a political institution. Monarchy refers to the rule of one man, and monarchical absolutism refers to the idea that the monarch should exercise absolute or unrestricted powers over his subjects. Usually, monarchy takes the form of a hereditary system of rule in which succession is by inheritance or blood descent. The monarchical system of rule can be traced back to ancient times and was particularly popular among the Teutonic tribes, that is, the people who lived in northwestern Europe in former times. Among early political theorists, monarchy was also considered the best of all possible forms of government. For instance, Plato argued that power in a good system of government should be concentrated in the hands of a philosopher king or a knowledgeable monarch. Initially, ancient kings were elected by tribal councils. Gradually, the kings began to suggest those who should succeed them, and the councils approved these people without opposition or criticism. In the course of time, kings began to choose their successors without consulting the councils. By the late 16th century, supporters of monarchy started to use the theory of the divine right of kings to justify the powers of the monarch. According to this theory, God had personally chosen the king to rule, and opposition to the king was therefore opposition to God. Much of the history of Europe between the 16th century and the early 20th century was dominated by a struggle between the defenders of monarchy and the advocates of democracy, who favored a system of government controlled by the elected representatives of the people. So bitter was this struggle that in 1815, an agreement known as the Concert of Europe was signed among the kings of Europe, under which they resolved to perpetuate the absolute rule of the monarch despite mounting popular pressures for democracy. Nonetheless, the forces of democracy remained steadfast, and by the end of the First World War, monarchy had been eliminated as an important political institution in Europe. With respect to Africa, most of the pre-colonial monarchical systems had their powers reduced when the colonial masters handed over power to new and modern political elites at independence. There are some countries in the world today that have retained their monarchical institutions, such as Great Britain, Sweden, Denmark, Holland, Norway, Morocco, and Saudi Arabia, to mention just a few of such countries. It is important to note, however, that most of the present-day monarchies have no governing functions at all. For example, in Great Britain today, the king or queen occupies a merely symbolic or ceremonial position. He or she merely performs such ceremonial functions, such as reading the government's legislative program at the beginning of a new parliamentary term, approving the laws made by Parliament, and calling for elections when the government decides it is time to seek the people's mandate. In Europe generally, those monarchies that have survived to the present day are those that accepted the democratic revolution and the consequent reduction in their powers. In countries like France and Russia, where the monarchies refused to accept political democracy, the institution of monarchy was completely wiped out after very bloody revolutions in which the monarch, his family, and loyal supporters were killed. Thomas Hobbes and the theory of monarchical absolutism. The most famous exponent of monarchical absolutism was Thomas Hobbes, who lived between 1588 to 1679. He developed his ideas in England during a period in which conflict between the Parliament and the monarchy led to a civil war, in which the monarchy was violently overthrown before it was later restored after 11 years of army control. Hobbes therefore developed his ideas, which were published in the book Leviathan, to justify the restoration of the English monarchy. The most important feature of Thomas Hobbes' idea is that, unlike most supporters of the institution of monarchy during his time, he rejected the theory of the divine right of kings. Rather, Hobbes argued that the absolute powers of the monarch came from the people through a social contract. According to Hobbes, man was naturally and basically an aggressive creature. Before the making of the social contract which enthroned the monarch, man lived in a state of nature in which people acted as they wished and pursued their selfish interest without any concern for the interest and security of others. Each man was insecure and committed every kind of falsehood or violence in order to prevent himself from being harmed by others. Also, according to Hobbes, if any two men desired the same thing, which nevertheless they cannot both enjoy, they become enemies and endeavor to destroy or subdue one another. The state of nature was therefore a war of all against all. It was full of conflict and without peace, and could only lead to arbitrary death. According to Hobbes, the life of man in the state of nature was solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Hobbes, however, argued that men, in spite of their natural greed and aggression, were rational and could reason with each other in order to end the insecurity and chaos of the state of nature. Men therefore entered into a social contract or agreement with each other, in which they agreed to submit themselves to the authority of a monarch in return for the security, and in order to be provided by the monarch. Each man therefore laid down his right of self-protection and is contented with the security which the monarch will provide for him or his colleagues. It is after this social contract that human beings are rarely able to live reasonably and comfortably. It is only after this contract that art, science, morality, law, peace and tranquility are able to develop. Under the contract, the monarch's only obligation to the people is to keep order and maintain peace and only if he failed to do so can the people rise up against him. Other than the provision of order and security, the people had no rights to claim against the monarch. On the other hand, the monarch exercises absolute powers. For Hobbes, monarchical absolutism was the price people had to pay for the movement from the chaos of the state of nature to a civilized society of order and security. Despite Hobbes' arguments that a monarch should enjoy absolute powers, he was very unpopular among the defenders of monarchy or the monarchists. This should not surprise you. While the defenders of monarchy believed that a king's authority arose directly from God's will, Hobbes argued that the authority of the monarch came from the people through a social contract. Now, study this material that come with your course manual to access more information on 1. The nature of the state and the relation between the state and the individual 1, and the nature of the state and the relation between the state and the individual 2. As you study the materials, try to examine Machiavelli's thesis that the end justifies the means in the action of rulers. Also examine the social contract theory of John Locke. And also try to review how Hobbes conceives the state of nature. Post your findings in Activity 3.1 on Course Forum at UI Mobile Class. Your response should not be more than a paragraph or 80 words on each of the questions. In this study session, we have tried to define monarchical absolutism as an idea that a monarch should exercise absolute or unrestricted powers over his subjects. Monarchy, as a political institution, developed from ancient times and was subsequently strengthened, especially in the 16th century, when the theory of the divine right to kings claimed that the monarch was chosen by God. Thomas Hobbes was the most famous exponent of monarchical absolutism in that he argued in his book Leviathan that a monarch should exercise absolute powers over his subjects. Hobbes, however, did not believe in the divine right of kings by arguing that the monarch's absolute powers came from the people. Thank you for listening. We have now come to the end of Studies Session 3.